All right, it looks like people are starting to join us. I want to say thank you and welcome to our second lecture of the second version of our Enhancing Wellness for Healthcare Professionals lecture series. So my name's Catherine Reed. I am thrilled that you're all here. I am an art therapist and the Creative Arts Therapy Manager, Program Manager here at Children's Hospital Colorado. That is one of my roles. And today I am really representing CORAL. So the folks who put this lecture series together are part of my team. I'm lucky enough to be a part of. It's called Colorado Resilience Arts Labs. And we are funded by the National Endowment of the Arts in DC. And we are really a group of multidisciplinary professionals, including healthcare, a doctor and a research team. He happens to be the chief of pulmonology at the University of Colorado, Denver or Aurora. And we have my program, the Ponzio Creative Arts Therapy program here at Children's, and then Lighthouse Writers Workshop. Together, we are a team working to really build bridges between the healthcare world and the creative arts therapy world. So I'm going to just read to you quickly our mission and our vision, and then I will be introducing our speaker for the day. So CORAL is striving to create a vibrant, collaborative creative arts therapy community that is committed to enhancing healthcare professional well-being and alleviating psychological distress in the workplace and beyond. We're doing pretty exciting research to see if creative arts therapy interventions, currently in a 12-week workshop with sequential curriculum, can reduce burnout and can create a sense of resilience in our healthcare professionals. We encourage healthcare providers to find a creative outlet, build their identity, and establish a sense of community through the arts. By creating a more engaged workforce, we can support healthcare professionals in their efforts not only to help themselves, but to improve patient outcomes, enhance patient and family satisfaction, and even reduce healthcare costs. Our data looks amazing. We do have a recent article in the American Journal of Medicine. So if anyone's curious about CORAL or would like to learn more, please feel free to reach out. I know that our website is in the chat currently, as put there by our program manager, Rafaela Mantelli. So thank you, Rafaela. Okay, so time to talk about our current speaker. We are so lucky today to have Kathy Malchiotti, who has a PhD and an REAT, that's Expressive Arts Therapy. She is the executive director of the Trauma-Informed Practices and Expressive Arts Therapy Institute and works as a consultant to the Department of Defense. And she is an investigator on a 5-year grant with the U.S. Department of Education, integrating trauma-informed expressive arts into classrooms. Kathy is a very popular presenter and workshop leader. She has given over 700 invited keynote speaker presentations and workshops throughout the US, Canada, Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and Australia. She has authored 20 books, including the best-selling Trauma and Expressive Arts Therapy, Brain, Body, and Imagination in the Healing Process, and Understanding Children's Drawings. Her publications have been translated in over 20 languages. So, of course, we are very grateful and happy to introduce Kathy and listen to her speak to us for about 40 minutes. I want to say really quickly, if you have questions as Kathy speaks, please put them in our question and answer area of the Zoom call. And I will be asking her those questions in the last 15 or 20 minutes of this time together. So Kathy, thank you for being with us. We're thrilled to have you. I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Okay, I'm glad to be here too. And let me get my screen share up because that's the most important thing right now. I can get that underway. And yeah, I'm really grateful and happy to be here. I'm also going to set myself up here so that I'm recording from my side too. So we'll get a nice recording for all of you that weren't able to come today and see it later on the website. And I guess that will be posted, right, Catherine, on the chat? I think somebody may have, Rafaela may have already posted that. So today, I made up this title specifically for this lecture today because it's something I've been thinking about and writing about for quite some time, and I keep coming back to it, that the expressive work, the arts, are really ancient practices that were restorative, and I'm going to go into that first. But now the fascinating thing to have been in this field so long for many decades, to see that neuroscience actually is helping us find out why these practices have been happening for thousands of years. So there's so much, it's just snowballing in terms of research. And I will say, and I'll show you another slide here in a second to give you an idea of where I'm situated. Catherine described a little bit of it. The field of trauma, of psychological trauma, a lot of this data is coming from there, but it's coming from a lot of different places. Developmental, autism, all different quadrants of challenges that people have in different ways. So that's where I want to focus. And in the second half, I'll go more into that area of what we're learning about, how fascinating and how important these approaches are. So Catherine already mentioned this. I actually started out working in trauma as an art therapist and play therapist many decades ago, and working with children who survived what was then called domestic violence, but there was also child abuse involved, interpersonal violence involved. And that was kind of my starting point, my foundation. Now, I say that now and think back, we didn't know much about how art-based approaches worked. We didn't know much about how trauma affected the mind and the body. And, we've come into a decade here where research is emerging so quickly and so very connected to why we should use the expressive approaches that I'm going to try to introduce today in the talk. And also, in my current time, just again to situate you, work a lot with the military, started out working with, of all branches of the military, the Navy SEALs, and work with the Army, work with families, work with active combat military, veterans, and particularly female military who have survived interpersonal violence in their role in the military. So, all this is kind of a long continuum for me, and starting out in that work of violence and continuing it into the present day. And I will say, military are one of the largest adopters of art-based approaches. It really resonates with them in their challenges with post-traumatic stress and some of the other things that come along with that. And the second piece is the U.S. Department of Education grant, which was a surprise about a year ago to find out that I was part of a grant to introduce trauma-informed expressive arts therapy to classroom teachers and help them introduce it into classrooms. So we're in our second year with that. So there's a wonderful learning curve there, but also a lot of data already coming about to show the efficacy of that in both, not just the classroom children, which range from age 5 to 17 or 18 years old, but also the teachers themselves, which I think is phenomenal at this time when a lot of teachers are very stressed by what they've had to go through over the last several years and other things that are challenging about the classroom. So here's where I want to start, is expressive arts therapy, and I want to give you a baseline definition for that because it's a little bit different than what we call creative arts therapies. But what my focus is the idea of expressive arts therapy that really is, in my mind, and if you see the pictures here, some of the different art forms that go into it, it's both an ancient, which comes from our cultural anthropology and ethnology and those areas of study, and also a contemporary practice. It's a contemporary treatment as well. I think this is a fascinating thing because it speaks to humans' ability to find things that will be helpful and reparative and restorative. And I think expressive arts therapy, if you had to really pick one thing that it will keep coming back to today, it has a lot of restorative components to it. And I think we don't talk about that so much even in treatment of either patients physically or emotionally, psychologically, the idea that there are practices that not only reduce symptoms and reduce the feeling bad, but can replace those feelings and those experiences with something that is restorative. So keep that in mind as I go through this, because I think that is a core principle of expressive arts therapy and all the art-based approaches. So I just want to start here with what is expressive arts therapy for those that may not have heard me talk about it before or read any of the literature about it. You hear a lot of different things. You hear about art therapy and music therapy. You hear this term creative arts therapies. Expressive arts therapy distinguishes itself, I think, by this one principle of thinking about all the different art forms. So visual art, music and sound, dance movement, drama. I even include humor and play in this, creative writing, all used in, by many different kinds of practitioners in psychotherapy, counseling, and healthcare currently. Expressive arts therapy is an integrative approach. We really seek to combine these different art forms in different ways for people depending on their needs in order to help them tap their senses in various ways. And again, this is not a new concept. This is something that people have done for thousands of years, combine the arts in ways that were restorative for themselves. So when we talk about creative arts therapies, we're often talking about various areas that people are trained in and get expertise and skill in. So I started out in the field of art therapy, which is visual art. Other people may have started in music therapy, dance movement therapy, drama therapy. Those are the four core approaches. They form the creative arts therapy. When I talk again about expressive arts therapy, I'm always thinking about how I can combine those various areas. And that just happened along the way when I saw that people who needed intervention with trauma needed multiple kinds of experiences. So, somewhat personal to me, but it's also a field. And it's a field that you can study in various ways, but it has some core principles, I think, that are important to mention here. It's action-oriented. I say implicit because a lot of the work is nonverbal, even though we do talk during our expressive arts therapy sessions. And it's very sensory-based communication because, again, infusing sound, movement, image making, enactment, maybe role play, all those things are very sensory-based and, very much used to address a lot of different issues and challenges. One of the things I think a lot about, and I think this is true of the field of expressive arts therapy, is its goal is to really help resensitize the body and mind to positive sensations, emotions, and thoughts. We may treat symptoms using it, but also we have this ability to increase that capacity in those areas. So I'm coming back to that restorative practice idea. Keep that in mind as we go along here. So here's something I recently wrote about in an article and then wrote about it in a handbook of expressive arts therapy that came out recently that, really is expressive arts therapy, the original psychotherapy. We think of psychotherapy as talk therapy, and that's been around for 150 years or more formally as a discipline in psychiatry and in all the different kinds of psychotherapies where you come in and talk to somebody. Before that, there were thousands of years of people using other kinds of methods that may not have been talk per se, but in the form of movement and sound and art making, to really do that kind of restorative and reparative work. So, here's just a cultural anthropology view of this. And I think this is worth thinking about, even in terms of the current research that is being done in the field of expressive arts therapy and all the arts therapies, that this original psychotherapy emerged as rituals and spiritual traditions, these things we still have amongst us. imagery, sound, procedures, ceremonies, and often they were in direct response to trauma and loss. So sometimes we look at all these images here of people dancing, playing music, making image, enacting as art forms. But really their purpose, throughout history has been to help people also return to psychological, physical, and social equilibrium. So, this is a longer tradition than verbal psychotherapy, that nonverbal implicit communication has always been valued as reparative and restorative by humans. It, definitely came about before language. And the interesting thing is when I get to the neuroscience area, this makes a lot of sense. So when I get to that, keep this thought in mind too, that there is a connection about why we started with implicit nonverbal kinds of ways of healing. So, the other thing I think is really fascinating about expressive arts, and also art therapy, music therapy, drama therapy, dance therapy, all the domains, that go into it. It's very culturally driven. This is the one thing that we can find in the art forms is very personalized cultural traditions, sensory-based, according to the culture of rhythm, of synchrony, of moving together and training together, feeling what's inside the body, the felt sense, and the embodied communication. So, right now in the field of expressive arts and the other art forms, we're thinking a lot about this, what the body-based kind of experiences for people. And for many cultures, this is a more important way to help and assist and enhance their reparative and restorative experiences through the body, because the body, can feel these kinds of changes through all these different art forms. And I also say, essentially this is an asset-driven resilience kind of focus, more so than the symptom-driven that sometimes infiltrates psychotherapy. The arts are really about efficacy and mastery. So, it's really interesting with the Resiliency Lab there in Colorado that this is probably the one form of therapy that really meets that definition of how do we build resilience, because this is really naturally about that. It's about self-agency, it's about mastery, it's about finding those things in one's body that feel enlivening, that feel joyful, that instill curiosity. The other thing that I think is interesting about this, and of course it happens in group work in many forms of therapy, but it's very relational. And you can see in all these pictures, people engage together, in the art forms is a very important piece, I think, of the healing engagement that is found in expressive arts and all the different creative arts therapies. And then also I say restoration of identity, really finding a new identity and imagining a new narrative through expression. This is a really core thing too. So, you can think about expressive arts therapy as, defined by these, and also all the creative arts therapies, your art therapy and music therapy, again, dance movement therapy and drama therapy, having these qualities. So this is what I want to spend a little time on before I get into the neuroscience piece, is a four-part kind of introduction here, and thinking about expressive arts in terms of where it really came from culturally. And over the time of researching for one of the last book that I did in the book before, I thought a lot about this cultural impact and talked to a lot of anthropologists and, got their take on what they thought were the main practices. And they really do fall into four areas. One is movement. I'm going to show you some slides here in a bit. One is sound, one is storytelling, and the last is silence. So I'll describe those here in a second. I also want to share this slide with you because this is more focused on the trauma work that I do. In thinking about those four areas, these are the four areas I think about now when I'm working with someone to find out different ways they can experience things and communicate through any one or more of these. areas of movement, sound, storytelling, and silence. So let me just go through, because I have a little bit of film footage too that'll kind of help you get more of a feel for this, because it's very hard on just a flat lecture here to get your sensations going a little bit. But movement, I think, is the one that is the foundation of all the expressive work. It becomes very important in trauma because sometimes people get frozen in their feelings and they need to move. But when we look at it as a cultural practice, there's so many different things that fall under that category and can be part of the expressive work. Obviously, a lot of people think about dancing, but there's yoga, what I call bilateral movement. There's sensory integration. There's classic cultural practices that still go on in the world. Tai Chi, Qigong, Aikido. There's also cultural practices of the hula, of Sundance, which is in the Native American community, Corroboree, which is in the South Pacific and New Zealand and Australia. And then there are restorative movements that we can introduce to people in the expressive works. I just want to share this one to just give you a visual. It is just a few seconds long here, but it is a group of practitioners that I worked with this summer in Australia, and they are demonstrating the experience together in movement of being held. So that's just a lovely demonstration that those psychotherapists were willing to work on and present to our large training group. But it really demonstrates what the core of movement is and expression is, and it's been this way for thousands of years. The synchrony between people, the connection between people, and the attunement between people. And, you know, we can talk about that with someone. We can do it as a therapist and a client, but in this kind of setting with this kind of a sensory experience, you really start to feel that synchrony and that attunement come alive. And I think, you know, this is one of the powerful things about expressive work, that we can actually introduce this to people in very simple ways to help them experience this very, again, reparative and restorative kind of experience. So here's sound, and I just want to show you a little film here. You know, sound we return to constantly in our lives, especially music, when we feel distressed or we feel a loss. And I don't know how many people remember, not that long ago, a few years ago, the burning of the Notre Dame Cathedral, and people spontaneously coming out into the world to sing to the cathedral. But part of this is gathering together, to be together, to make sounds together, to experience again that synchrony and that attunement together, but using music as a way to express the emotions, but also feel more restored in oneself in this action-oriented moment. I'm just going to stop that there for time, but you know, all the things in sound that we can do with singing and drumming and playing instruments, but there are very simple practices we can do expressively with people. Humming, if you think about chanting in prayer, that's sound, that's repetitive, that has an impact on people's restoration. Even listening to music, you know, or experiencing certain kinds of vibrations from sound. Or we all know now the research is exploding over the last 10 years about how important those experiences are. So, you know, sound is another piece. I'm going to skip a slide here just because we don't have so much time and go on to storytelling, which again, can happen in a lot of different ways. This is another practice that's been handed down for thousands of years. Sometimes we think, okay, that's verbal, right? And it can be sharing a story to others and having that story be heard and witnessed. But we can have this in dramatic enactment, in drama, in role play, improvisation. excuse me, also through image making. You can see, these folks in the masks, but also the images here. So people can do this in different ways and express stories. This becomes really important in trauma work because sometimes people don't have the words for what's happened or don't want to share those stories in a verbal way out of fear or other kinds of powerful barriers to expression. But storytelling can be done in so many different ways, as we know from our history as humans, that there are many different ways to express that. Also, ceremonies and rituals throughout time have been able to express stories that are handed down through cultures. So storytelling, again, boy, a lot of diversity here, crossover maybe into some of the movement and sound, right? But another powerful piece of cultural reparative, restorative work. And the last one is silence. And I think a lot of times immediately, if we're in the fields of counseling or psychotherapy or working with people, we think about mindfulness and meditation. And certainly that's a form of silence. When we add being in an art form, being expressive in an art form, in a mindful way, in a meditative way, in a contemplative way, that also is, part of that silence. And art making, we know, out of many of the different expressive forms, art making and music are very powerful at helping people when you give the right circumstances and direct a certain form of expression with them, help silence the body. And when I say that, I'm talking about self-regulation, how it calms the body, reduces cortisol, brings the heart rate down, decreases the sense of pain perception, even in some instances. So we know a lot about music and art making as ways of silencing the body when, we give a certain kind of experience for people to have. And that's, again, restorative on many levels. And certainly that comes from, again, thousands of years of cultural experience with this. I want to just point out here that witnessing an art form, whether it be theater, performance, museum works, so works up on a wall, these are things also that we know now. And we learned this before the pandemic when people could gather. We're getting back to gathering again, but going into theater together, hearing a performance, hearing a concert, looking at art on a wall together. People started to entrain and started to breathe at the same rate, depending on what they were looking at. But again, that experience of synchrony, but also silencing and quieting the body in some way. So that is a very powerful area of study that comes out of the arts and healthcare for the most part. And there are actually now a lot of museum projects involving art therapists across the country and in Canada that are getting similar data about the really powerful restorative effects of just witnessing and being in a group. Witnessing together is really what is the most powerful and reparative. So I'm going to jump in here quickly from ancient to modern and give you a little bit of highlights about what we're learning in neuroscience, about how and why expressive arts, creative arts all support health and well-being. And there are just so many things coming about. But these are two principles that I learned early on. They're a little bit older. They come actually from the 1990s, the late 1990s. Expressive arts, expressing in an art form, is really this implicit non-linguistic process. And Antonio Damasio, a neuroscience researcher, who's written many, many books over the last couple decades, really identified that all language does not actually come from the left brain. It actually starts as a non-linguistic process in our right brains and emerges from the right brain and precedes language. So, really supports this idea that we do have a communication center that may not be language oriented, but it actually stimulates language. So I think this is one of the powerful things that all people in the art-based approaches know, that they start to get stories from people sometimes those stories start to come out in language when they were unable to express them in any other way until they created an image, until they did that movement, until they experienced sound in some way. The stories started to emerge. So he had a really, excellent explanation for that based in his research back in 1998. More recently, but actually in the 90s at first, Bessel van der Kolk really pointed to the idea that traumatic experiences are not always encoded as explicit memory, which is declarative with words, but they might be stored as nonverbal sensory fragments. When I first read that in 1994, it really set off a light bulb in my head about, wow, this is why I think these things are working. People that are traumatized may not always have the language because of the distress of the trauma, and things were encoded in a different way in the brain. Now he went forward in 2014 and New York Times bestseller, still #1 on the paperback list, Body Keeps the Score. So he followed that whole idea that the body knew what was going on before it could articulate through words. So there's some powerful evidence there. So what I've kind of found, just in the work in general over these decades, is what neurobiology is teaching us is really about helping people come to their senses. And we really can't just do that through talk. We can do that in other ways that are implicit. And one of them, of course, is this expressive work. And that's a really important and also, I think, key to developing any kinds of components for addressing trauma, which I'm always thinking about in the work that I focus on. And this is a way also for people to tell stories of traumatic events through nonverbal implicit forms of communication. So, this I think we know now from way back from Antonio Damasio, and now fast forward to 2022, that these senses are really important to tap in certain ways to help people be able to express what's going on when the words are just not there or too frightening to talk about. So here's a little bit really quickly about where trauma research is going with expressive work. And part of it is to treat what we call the lower brain to address these sensory reactions in the body first. This is all about sensory processing and sensory integration, and this is the area that trauma researchers are really focusing on. So again, with expressive work, we don't necessarily tap senses so much through talk, but when we're engaging somebody in something tactile, visual, auditory, all these different things, we're starting to use that platform of sensory processing to help them communicate, to help them understand their body's reactions, but also express and release and repair some of the things that have been distressful in their lives. So here's one concept. I call it embodied cognition. It's a term that's mostly used in the education field, but we're really learning that, again, get people in motion, doing something action-oriented, helps tap the body's senses of what's going on, and also helps them learn more and experience more than talk alone. So I'm just going to play this little film here while I'm talking. Somebody doing some bilateral work, both sides of the body, drawing. This is a good example of expressive arts work because we're combining something here. I could be playing music too and creating a rhythm that she could be following. That would even bring it to another dimension. But all this pattern, repetitive rhythmic activity, walking, running, dancing, singing, art making, even repetitive meditative breathing, these are all kind of around the topic of embodied cognition, and really starts with just sensory experience. She's not working on making anything here in particular, and just, going with the movement. So, this is one of the things we're looking at in the education grant and helping children and young adults, actually all the way up through young adults, to experience this kind of bilateral movement and find out, what does this really do? How does it impact the person? And again, a combination of different expressive arts forms. So here's another piece too to think about is the idea of all these things that go into expressive arts. So rhythm and movement, synchrony, entrainment. But the idea of sensory integration, and this is the big thing now in trauma research, and I think it really fits well with expressive approaches. It's giving us a lot of data about what we should be doing. And, sensory integration is a big topic, would take another hour, but we talk about our internal sense, which is our interoception, our five senses, what's going on, what I'm hearing, what I'm smelling, what I'm seeing, all these different external senses. Proprioception, where is my body in relationship to everything around me right now in this room? And vestibular function, if I was standing up, what is my balance and gravitational security? How do I feel that? All these things are impacted even by psychological trauma. That's the latest work that's going on, is thinking about how people's senses are thrown off by trauma. So, I think a lot of people that we see who have various challenges, they might fall into this category of having trouble with sensory integration. And often in trauma, what happens is there's a disconnection between the outside senses, those five senses, and understanding what's going on in the body, the interoception. So that's one of the things that expressive arts offers numerous approaches to support people in reconnecting those two experiences, because oftentimes they get disconnected, or people don't want to sense what's going on inside for good reasons, because it feels uncomfortable. Gradually being able to reintroduce their sense of felt experiences in the body. So, I think this is one of the things we're learning, that expressive work has to happen in order to have these two things connect again, that we can't talk people into it. We have to give them experiences so they can re-engage with their internal sensations. And I think I'm coming down to the last few slides here. Co-regulation, just going to go briefly over this. A lot of positive social engagement that goes on. Now, here's a good example here with drumming, percussion, doing things together, being able to be in synchrony with the therapist, being able to be in synchrony with a group. And what's different about it, again, than just having a synchronous conversation, we're bringing the senses in, we're bringing rhythm in, we're bringing movement in, we're bringing different forms of expression in. So really solidifying that co-regulation that's so important for humans to feel and sense that they're connected to someone else. All relationships, all healing, I always say, all healing ultimately takes place within the context of a relationship. In expressive arts, we really add the senses to that. And of course, talk therapy, there's a lot of relationship in that, but we don't have this experience of synchrony, moving together, being in connection with each other on multiple sensory levels. So this is another thing we're starting to learn about, and working a lot on this idea of reflexive convergence in the Department of Education grant, that there is an importance to multisensory interactions and relational moments in expressive arts therapy. And that those support these really important things that are reparative and restorative: mutual trust, connection, understanding, and even empathy. Those are the things that we're looking at in that. So, you have to introduce the senses in some way to get that kind of experience going. So here's my last thought here, and then we can stop and have a little discussion, or have Catherine field some questions. This is the thing I think that's really the takeaway here about expressive arts therapy, all the creative arts therapies. Again, art therapy, music therapy, dance movement therapy, drama therapy, play therapy, even, for example. They support capacity. And this, I think, really fits your model when you're looking at the arts as a form of resiliency. Again, we can have that discussion with people. We can make suggestions to them about how to build resilience. But resilience is something you feel in your body. And it's really is a capacity that can be developed. But we need to bring in something sensory-based. We need to bring in something that's action-oriented. We need to bring in things where people can feel felt and feel felt by others, can experience something through doing, can experience something through all these multidimensional experiences of movement, of sound, again, of, image making, of storytelling, of being witnessed. So, this is what I think about a lot right now in work with, whether it's the military or whether it is the classroom and the classroom teachers, that mental illness, and we'll include trauma there, all these physical challenges that people may be coping with, they're not just what we're having to treat. What we have to do is also think about how do we expand the capacity for resilience, for enlivenment, for self-compassion, and for curiosity. I'm going to emphasize that last one here on closing, because what I've seen over the years and working with trauma survivors and other populations, medical populations that have had life-threatening illnesses, for example, fear is something that takes away that curiosity. But when we're introducing expressive work, we have all kinds of opportunities to introduce curiosity, whether it's like, here's some new art materials, let's see what they can do. Let's see what this drum can do if we beat on it in a certain way. What do these sounds do? How do we feel about these sounds? And how can we reintroduce being curious to those experiences? Those are the moments that really start to expand people's capacity. They expand the capacity for them to start to be curious, to start to be playful, to start to feel their own bodies again in positive ways, empowering ways, and resilient ways. So that's where I'm going to stop because of time. I'm looking at my clock here, and I guess I'll jump out of here. Okay, Catherine, should stop the share. Are you there?
I am absolutely here, Kathy. Thank you so much. What I'm a little at a loss for words, because I feel like you've encapsulated so much of what I do, my team does every day, in a way that was really, I think, accessible to everyone and so comprehensive at the same time. So thank you, first of all, for that really succinct 40 minutes. Okay, so I have about 10 questions, or 11 now. I'm going to try to get through them all. So let's see how this goes.
I'm trying to get both you and I up on the screen too. I can't seem to do that. I don't know if tech can do that.
Okay.
Can you pin both of us? Maybe he's
okay,
gone.
First question. It should be, I think every time you speak, you should be coming onto the screen.
Oh, I jump on, but I'm trying to get next door to you, which tech could do.
I see. Together. All right, first question from Raina. Do you get resistance, Dr. Malchiodi, about trying this expressive arts approach by people? And if so, how do you respond to resistance?
Well, this question comes up a lot. Trying to get back on the screen here. Add spotlight. There we go. We're both up here. The first thing you really have to do is believe in what you're offering. And I really believe it. You can tell how enthusiastic I am about it. Now, you also have to start very sensitively with people. Just give them a lot of space to explore what it is that this is all about. A lot of times I get people coming in, and it's usually, not to stereotype military, but military men saying, I know I've heard from people that this could really help me, but I don't know. I'm not creative. So we have to have that discussion first, that it's not just for children, that actually they've heard from their peers already, luckily, that something positive has happened, and say, we're going to explore a lot of different things. And, you are the one that's going to tell me what feels right here about this. So yeah, it's a process, but I think also your own enthusiasm, and you need to be involved with it yourself. I know Catherine is. I'm involved with it. We come from art therapy backgrounds. So, but, I'm involved with musical instruments. I'm involved with performance, all those things. But you have to also have that conversation first with people about what it can be and what they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
So, but that's a very common question, because I think you're going to get that question. You're going to be questioned. And you also have to bring hope into it too. Sometimes I just share some personal stories with them about that, or stories that other clients have given me permission to share
Mhm.
about how this has worked for them.
I find resistance also to be very culturally relative,
Mhm.
because I know as Americans, most of the adults I work with have divided themselves either into two categories, one being a creative or the
Mhm.
other being not creative.
Yeah.
And so I find resistance really sits in that connection with that identity and realizing that actually there's a lot of flexibility
Yeah.
um, in the concept of
But I
being
want to
creative.
say to that too is, see, now I use the word, and that's why I really like the term expressive arts therapy, not
Mhm.
just because that's what I explore or feel comfortable with. The term expressive versus creative are two different worlds. And that's what I say too. And like somebody will use that word. I'm not creative. And I'm like, you know what? I went to art school, and a lot of days I wake up, I'm not creative, believe me. But I said, we all can be expressive. And I said, you can make a line on the paper, and that's expressive. You can hit that drum 3 times in a row, and any rhythm you want, you've expressed something. Someday you're going to walk in here, I'm going to pretty much bet on it that you're going to say, I think I did something that was creative, maybe between sessions. It's a personal definition. And I think that's a really good one to clear up right away. And I say, don't worry about that. Expressive is what we want to get to. And there's all kinds of ways to get there.
Nice. Okay, I'm not gonna go sequentially with these questions because we do have 15 now, and I want to get to as many of them as possible. One of the questions is from one of our partners in our research. So she is a dance movement therapist here at Children's Hospital Colorado, Hillary Sin. And she asks, first she says, thank you for all your work, Kathy. Is there any research that you know of that addresses the therapeutic benefit of opening the therapeutic container from process and then shifting to exhibited product or performance?
Where I don't know it, but I would guess that in the research that's really rapidly coming out of the arts and healthcare, and some of it's coming from University of Florida. Some of it is also, you should check into Johns Hopkins International Arts and Mind Lab. Those are the 2 places that are really generating a lot of research, and they're blending the therapeutic with healthcare, but also with arts-based performance, exhibits, going to witness concerts, and, they're blending all of that. So my guess would be, if there's anything out there, it'll be in those 2 camps. And there's also a researcher, Tasha Golden. She was actually living here in my community. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. And she works, I believe, for Johns Hopkins. And I would look that one up, because I believe she may have done something that fits what you're talking about, but it may be more in the area of creative writing and not dance movement necessarily. But yeah, bringing that from, okay, I've done this work therapeutically, and then moving it on into
Beautiful.
actual product of some
Yep.
kind.
It's a really interesting question right now for us, especially because we are in the process of creating an exhibition in 2023 about the work we've done in choral. So between dance, music, art, and writing, we want to make sure that we really emphasize all 4 modalities. So thank you for that answer. Okay, here's another question from Augustine. She asks, can you please expand on the implicit part of expressive arts therapy as opposed to explicit?
So implicit is the nonverbal, essentially. So if you said to me right now, and I was the patient, can you express how you're feeling right now through a movement? So if I just did that movement, that would be an implicit communication. Excuse me. Explicit is words, essentially, declarative memory, what happened, if I'm going to tell you a story of what happened. So it's just a term that I think we now use to define a little bit of the difference between expressive arts communication, which still can be explanatory with language, but we try to start with that implicit.
Nice.
So yeah, making a drawing, making sounds, making music, making a movement.
And then sometimes it's bridging the two, right? Is helping clients or folks make explicit what has been implicit and
Yeah.
has not necessarily been spoken yet.
And that's what I said. I think at some point, I think the research is really coming along to really prove that there is, through implicit communication, a stimulation of language.
Nice.
And it's much more quick that way than trying to talk it through. That you know, so I think that's the thing. It's a strength of these expressive approaches, that they stimulate language somehow. And I think that even is developmental, because we think back to young children when they're sitting and just scribbling and drawing, and they start to tell stories about drawings.
Yep.
There's a connection there that I think there's a language stimulation that goes on.
It's so true. And I know that we talk about it here at Children's as kind of almost being like backdoor. We're backdoor therapy. Like if you want to get there quickly, or you're stuck somehow in the verbal arena, that expressive or creative arts therapy can really help accelerate the healing and expressive process.
And that's what makes it cost effective. We can get there more quickly. I'm just going to throw that one in and support that notion.
I love that.
I think it's true. I'm not just saying that because I'm biased. I really think that that's true. I mean, yeah.
So Elizabeth Stanbro asks, she says, I work in the field of creative aging, including doing visual art programs with people who have dementia. Do you do any work in this field? I would love to apply your research to this field.
I don't, but I think it's there. I think this stuff is really important to aging. And unfortunately, we lost one of the people quite a few years ago that really was carrying forth that research in that area. It was Gene Cohen, and he wrote a book about creativity and aging. And he was on national news and all the NPR stations for a long time. He unfortunately passed in his 60s. In the middle of all of this research that he was doing on how getting together and singing, for example, really improve one's quality of life and physical health. I think the most astounding research came out quite a few years ago now, from Mayo Clinic about taking up making art after 65. Now, making art to me, or going to be an artist, but painting, drawing, engaging in something, that there was a 65% reduction in cognitive impairment. Now, mild cognitive impairment. So I wasn't saying that, oh, you're going to cure dementia or Alzheimer's. These are bigger issues. But that mild cognitive impairment that most people start to encounter after 65 was greatly reduced just by becoming, this all of a sudden an artist, making art on a pretty regular basis, just as a hobby, fun, being in a group, doing that kind of thing, reduce that cognitive impairment. So there's things there that are out there in the literature,
Wendy Router asks a related question around those diagnosed with autism and using expressive arts therapy. I know we do lots of work with our neurodivergent kids here at the hospital, but do you have experience also with autism?
No. Okay. That's my one big, area I think is fascinating, but I think the thing about it is the neurodivergence is so diverse that we don't have a clear answer, because we're dealing with all of us that are so different in different ways. If we categorize ourselves as neurodiverse, there's just a wide range there.
Yep.
So there's information, I think, coming out, but is there a clear universal answer? Probably not, because my only experience is there are some probably children I've worked with that probably hadn't been diagnosed as autistic, and their sensory preferences can be quite different. So you might have to try all these different approaches. It might not be drawing, might be making sounds, might be movement, might be some other kind of thing.
And I think what we've seen here at the hospital too is a real sharp increase in relational and social skills using creative arts therapy with kids in that department. So, there's so many questions. I'm trying to decide which ones to ask you. So
5 minutes.
Yes, well, several people have asked about your slides, Kathy, and your
Uh-huh.
email address. So can you talk about the access to either of those things? How you
I
like to do
never
that?
give out my slides because then they turn up on the internet. So
Okay.
it's sad. This is what happened one time. But you'll have the film, so you can come back and watch forever.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
very true. It's really important to know we are recording this. It will be on our website for Coral, which is at the very beginning of the chat.
Yeah.
Um,
So you have access to it that way, and that's
and then
great.
how about your email? Do you ever share your email address?
If you go to my website on www.kathymalchiotti.com, there's a
Okay.
contact on there. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Oh, yeah. You can find me on Google. Unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of hits.
I will say, as an art therapist, you are probably the biggest name out there in terms of.
So yeah, you won't have much trouble emailing me.
Yeah, she can't hide.
But
Kathy,
also, I always say to people, if you're on Facebook or LinkedIn in particular, I'm on there a lot posting things. And LinkedIn, I really will suggest right now, is a great professional format for engaging with people. It's really pretty remarkable right now. Really good discussions. So,
okay, I'm going to squeeze one more question in.
yeah.
Specifically, in what ways has neurobiology informed us in this work?
I think I named some, embodied cognition, the whole thing of co-regulation, which, we didn't even get into that whole area of attachment, building attachment with people that have been disconnected. And this runs anywhere from having disconnected attachment as a young child to being disconnected right now because we've been through 2 years of pandemic, 3 years.
Yep.
Of that socially, physically distancing, all these changes in routines have created that. We have a lot of young adults right now with mental health issues because developmentally they got separated from others. So, that's a really important principle there. If you really want to connect with somebody, we're really finding out that connecting through the senses, through some kind of expressive work, is really going to move that along much faster than just trying to talk somebody into being more socially engaged. Yeah.
And it can also provide so much, I think, emotional safety because people can pace themselves when they're processing trauma in a way that verbally sometimes you can't do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I really
the other big one that I mentioned was the disconnection between what we feel inside and what we're experiencing. And we've known this one for decades, but they haven't been able to really prove it now and show that there really is that disconnection until they did the trauma research around that idea of, like, if I'm disconnected from my environment and I don't know what I feel inside, people that start to know what they feel in their bodies in safe ways are the ones that are more likely to improve in therapy. Now, how do you do that? You have to engage them in their senses somehow. And this is a very positive, reparative, and again, restorative way that's thousands of years old that we can reintroduce to people now with us being practitioners to have some knowledge around this. This is what's fantastic, that we have the neuroscience and neurobiology background to kind of lean into now and say, yeah, I know that worked, but I didn't know why. And now we know why. And it's just, I don't know, I can't say it enough that really is the foundation for all this efficacy in these approaches.
Well, Dr. Malchiotti, Kathy, thank you
You are welcome.
tremendously for the time that you shared with us today. It really will enhance not only our lab here in Colorado, but I think everyone who's listening and everyone who will listen in the future. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom and everything you published. So I want to really quickly just give a little plug for our next speaker in January. Her name is Tamara Underreiner. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And her talk will be called Mobilizing Wonder as an Art of Care, Reflections from the ASU Caregiving Lab's First 2 Years. Sounds like it's another one of the National Endowment of the Arts labs in Arizona, at Arizona State University. So I'm just really grateful again to Dr. Kathy Malchiotti for her time and her wisdom, and everyone who attended today. Thank you. You can access this video again on our website. Kathy, I hope you have a beautiful weekend, and everyone listening, take good care of yourselves and take care.
Everybody stay well.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.